Good morning. This group is already empowered and the day has just begun. Thank you, Deborah, for that great introduction. And thank you all for the great welcome that you've given me. I want to let you know that not only is Deborah resourceful, she's also very persuasive. Because when she asked me to come and speak, I assumed she wanted me to come and talk about what I always talk about, and that is the great work that I think we do at community colleges in California. And I never miss an opportunity to go out and boast about Palomar College because I see the miracles that we perform in people's lives. Well, when she said, no, we want you to come and talk about you, that was really the first time that no came across my mind. And as I was trying to think about a way to retract the yes that I'd just given her, she kept talking, and I heard myself say, okay, I can do that. So, no and yes are integral in our everyday lives. And sometimes we just have to go with it. So no is powerful, but so is yes. But I'll have to tell you, sometimes no wins out. And it's a seemingly insignificant little word, but it has been part of the operational lexicon of women since the dawn of time. Think about it. No, you can't eat the fruit from this tree. No, you can't own property. No, the decision of whether, when, or who you marry does not belong to you. No, you can't go to school. Now, I'm sure that each of you would have your own list of personal no's. There are entire academic disciplines devoted to the exploration of how the word no has defined and confined the lives of women. Many of you, I'm sure, have taken a course like feminism and women's suffrage, women in science and math, and I could go on, but I know you know the history. I am also sure that without hesitation, each of you in this room has your own personal shero. And I know that each of you would have someone who took on the no of her time, who battled society, who blazed a trail that made it possible for you to actually be in this room. They made it possible for you to make different choices. They made it possible for you to say, actually, no doesn't mean no. So as you think about your own personal sheroes, I'd like to share a few of my experiences with you. I want you to go back with me and take a trip to my youth. I want to look at 1960. And I chose this year because 1960 was the year that I turned 13. This is a time in a young girl's life where dreams start to take shape. At this time, I was the oldest of 4 children. My parents' marriage was very rocky. My father had worked in an iron ore plant and he'd just lost his job. He was a veteran of World War II. I'm sure he was frustrated because he was unable to find work. Maybe he couldn't find work because he was a heavy drinker. Maybe he didn't look in the right places. Maybe his experiences and his expectations were just too high for a person of his color. We'll never know. What I do know is that my parents decided to divorce, and my mother made the decision to move back with her parents so she and the children would at least have a roof over their heads and we could all help with the farming. The place we moved to was Selma, Alabama. I'm sure you've probably heard of Selma. Segregation and Jim Crow laws were enforced so violently and so viciously in Selma that it became the place where a national spotlight on civil rights would be most effective. In 1960 in Selma, 57%, or approximately 15,000 of Selma's population, was African American. 80% of these 15,000 people lived below the poverty line. Most, including my family, worked as sharecroppers. Even though there were some educated professionals in that group, mostly teachers and civil servants from the nearby Air Force Base. And there were also 2 doctors. Fewer than 100 of those 15,000 people were registered to vote. And although the landmark case Brown versus the Board of Education had declared that separate schools for black and white students were unconstitutional in 1954, the good citizens of Selma, and most of the South for that matter, decided that it really didn't apply to them. So in 1960, everything was still segregated. Everybody who was black was always told, no, you can't go to this school. No, you can't go into this restaurant. If you're sick, no, you can't go to the hospital, or you can't go to the doctor's office and go through the front door. And no, you can't go into the place that I really wanted to go most, the city library. Segregation also meant that the adults in my life were prevented from exercising the forms of citizenship that we all take for granted today. It was no to voting, no to sitting on juries. So if you wanted to vote, however, you had to take a literacy test. Now, whites were excluded from taking the literacy test because they could prove that they were descendant of someone who was eligible to vote before 1867. And I'm sure you all remember what was happening in the United States before 1867. So the literacy tests, they would prove that they weren't eligible. They were eligible because they met the grandfather clause. So let me tell you a little bit about literacy tests. Some of the sample questions. Name all 67 counties in the state of Alabama. What date was Oklahoma admitted to the Union? And my personal favorite, how many bubbles are in a bar of soap? Now, the person administering the literacy test had the authority to determine what was on it on a particular day, whether or not the test taker passed. And then, after the literacy test, there was another hurdle, the poll tax. Now, although these weren't declared unconstitutional until 1966, in many places they were still given after that in the late 60s. So these were ways of saying no to blacks and to poor people in general. These were ways of stripping people of their civil rights. Now, I've told you so much about Selma because I want you to have a very clear picture of what it was like to grow up there in the 60s and how these Jim Crow laws had the potential to define and confine the future of a child who came into the world with 2 strikes against her already, poor and black. The options open to most children like me or maid, work in the paper mill, or become a field worker. You know, last week I had a conversation with a young student reporter at Palomar about growing up in the South. And she asked me a question that no one had ever asked me before. And she asked, "Weren't you angry?" And the question caught me off guard because I had to give it some thought. But after I have, I can truthfully say, April, no, I wasn't angry. When you have to spend your energies on your time on survival, anger and self-pity are two emotions that you really can't afford. I had to focus instead on spending and use those energies on working, on dreaming, and on trying to make life better. Now, as the 60s went on, as the civil rights movement expanded, so did my dreams. And fortunately for me, I had a mother and a grandmother who helped formulate and nourish my hopes. Ever since I could remember, I would say, I want to be a teacher. And my mother and my grandmother were the people who said, you know, you have to say no to no. You have to say no to living in the South. You have to say no to being uneducated. And you have to say no to being a second-class citizen. They helped me see the possibilities. They helped me see the yeses of life. And when I would say, I want to be a teacher, they would say, of course you can do that. Looking back on it, I think I focused on being a teacher because teachers were the only people I knew who did not pick cotton. And my goal was not to pick cotton the rest of my life. My mother and my grandmother would say to me, of course you'll go to college. Of course you'll be a teacher. All you have to do is work. All you have to do is study, and it will happen. But in 1966, when it actually came time to go, we hit a brick wall. There was no money. Undeterred, my mother and my grandmother came up with a plan. They said, you'll go, just not right now. So I signed up with an employment agency. It was a guaranteed job, $100 every 2 weeks, plus room and board. The day after I graduated from high school, having never been more than 60 miles away from Selma, I boarded a Greyhound bus bound for New York, and I became the live-in domestic worker of a family on Long Island. With Thursdays and Sunday afternoons off, I learned to take the Long Island Railroad into the city, and I spent most Thursday afternoons happily reading in the 42nd Street Library. I learned then that the library in Selma was nothing to be proud of. Actually, I found myself saying, when I went back years later, is this what they were keeping me from? So by December, my mother, my grandmother, and I had performed a miracle. We'd submitted my application, gotten an acceptance letter, and saved up enough money to cover the first semester. I entered Alabama State University as a freshman in January of 1967. You might think that my days having listened to no were over. But during orientation, here I was at a historically black college and university, and the administrating officer at orientation said to us, look to your left, look to your right. 2 of you won't be here 4 years from now. And I thought, what a welcome. But I remember making a silent vow and telling myself, I will be one who finishes. So 4 years later, with the help of a lot of my family, a lot of counselors who saw a lot of promise in me, a lot of people who helped me apply for student loans, small scholarships, I graduated on time. Now, after graduation, my next challenge was to actually find a job as a teacher. I knew I didn't want to stay in Alabama, so I timidly applied for applications everywhere but the state of Alabama. I applied in Detroit, I applied in Florida, and I applied in Mississippi. Surprisingly, I got offers and interviews everywhere I applied. I accepted a job teaching at the newly built Cocoa High School in Cocoa Beach, Florida. It was simultaneously an exhilarating and intimidating experience. I was on my own, doing what I'd always wanted to do. I was earning a paycheck, and for the first time, I was sending my mother and my grandmother money. Racially, however, the tables of my world had been turned upside down. Whereas the high school I'd attended was small and segregated, Cocoa High School was large and diverse. To be effective as a teacher and as a coworker, I sought to continue to broaden my world. I said no to the racial and color boundaries that had defined my early life. Now, those 3 years at Cocoa High School could be called my coming of age years. I learned to live in a diverse world, and to paraphrase Martin Luther King Jr., I learned to judge people by the content of their character, not the color of their skin. I also learned something about myself. I learned that I wanted to travel more. I wanted to go back to school, and I wanted to learn and earn an advanced degree. On my teacher's salary, however, I couldn't do either easily. So I looked for other career options. One that kind of fell in my lap was the military. Now, because Maxwell Air Force Base in Montgomery, where I'd gone to college, was close by, I'd worked as a tutor for veterans returning from Vietnam, and I'd actually met women in the Air Force. So that was my first choice. The Air Force, however, said no to my seeking a commission. They told me I'd have to come in enlisted. Now, you have to understand, I had no true understanding of the rank structures or even the differences in the missions of the armed forces. The only thing I knew for sure is that a second lieutenant was paid more than an airman. And according to all of those recruiting brochures, I met the criteria to become a lieutenant. So the Air Force said no, and believe it or not, I said yes to the Marines. So I went through Officers Candidate School and received a commission in 1971. And I want to confirm the toughness that the Marines brag about in their advertisements is not exaggerated. It was physically and mentally grueling. Of the 68 women who started the journey with me, 23 of us received a commission. Some left voluntarily. Some left because of the physical and mental stress. But some left because of the almost constant sexual harassment and blatant discrimination based on sex. You see, the Marines had said no to women more often in its glorious history than any other branch of the armed forces. Some, and I want to emphasize, not all of our male colleagues made their feelings about us crystal clear. We were not welcome. In their eyes, every spot a woman took was one less spot for a male. And they resented us for that. And I note with some sadness that not much has changed the 24 years that I've been out of the Marine Corps. As you know, last year, the Secretary of Defense announced a plan to move women into most combat occupations in all of the services. The Marine Corps conducted a survey of 53,000 Marines, and the survey was anonymous, so they would actually give their true feelings. 17% of that 53,000 said they would leave the Marines before they would serve with a woman in combat. So we haven't come as far as we think we have. Now, my 14 years in the Marines were far from easy all the time, but they were truly rewarding years. I was promoted from lieutenant to major. I got to travel and live in countries that I'd only dreamed and read about. I learned new skills. I gained new confidence. I met amazing people and formed lifelong and loyal friendships. With those skills, a new confidence, and a great circle of supporting friends, I made another life-changing decision. While assigned as a commanding officer of a Marine detachment in South Korea, I decided to adopt a child as a single parent. Not exactly commonplace in that day and age, but clearly I had come pretty good about making decisions that were far from commonplace. Not surprisingly, I started the process in an unorthodox way. I'd been working with Amerasian charities and had met a young woman who was pregnant. So the baby came first. Then I started the process of adoption. When I was scheduling the interview with the International Adoption Agency, the social worker asked if my husband would be available. She assumed I was the Marine wife, not the Marine. When I responded that I was single, I heard this audible little gasp, and she said, "No, not possible." And I said, "What's not possible?" In the Republic of South Korea, there were laws that prevented single people from adopting children. Well, I already had that baby. Nobody was going to take her away from me. So I started a 1-year battle to change that no to a yes. So you can see who won. So, as I conclude, I want to emphasize that my intention here hasn't been to imply that I have performed extraordinary feats. I haven't discovered a cure for a disease. I haven't done anything that would warrant a major news story. That's not why I said yes. I said yes because I thought it would be an opportunity for us to reflect together on the choices that we've had to make in our lives, on the many times we've been told no. I said yes because I hope that together we can reflect and thank the people who've helped us to turn no to yes. I hope that something in my experience, something that I've said this morning, will cause you to stop the next time you encounter a no in your life. I hope that the next time you are the no in someone else's life, that you'll stop, that you'll think, and you'll commit yourself to the notion that no will never again define or confine you. I hope that you'll commit to the fact that no will not determine who you are, where you want to go, or who you want to be. I hope that we as a village will have the courage to erase no for the many women in the United States who are still struggling to earn a living wage. I hope that after today, we will vow to erase no for the 1 in 5 children who go to bed hungry each night. I hope that you will use your empowerment that you've gotten here today to promise to erase no for the young girls in Pakistan who just want to read a book. I hope that you will use the power that you got here today, and something that I've said will spur you into action and help you think about young women all over this globe who are still sold into slavery. Always remember that we are empowered, and it's always important to remember that no is not always and forever no. Turn no to yes anytime you can. Thank you.